Welcome back, Focus Learners. Let's jump right into today's explainer because we are unpacking a genuinely fascinating source analysis. It uses the upcoming 2026 World Cup as a lens, kind of like a magnifying glass, to examine the true underlying state of the U.S. economy. We're looking past all those flashy headlines and the hype to see what the numbers are actually doing while everyone is distracted by the games.
Okay, let's dive into this with a really potent quote directly from our source material. Quote, "A country can be genuinely thrilled and genuinely in trouble at the exact same time. The confetti isn't a lie, it's just louder than the ledger." Wow, right? This beautifully sets the stage for our explainer today. The core argument here is that the massive, beautiful spectacle of an international sports tournament might just be distracting us from some quietly rotting economic fundamentals.
So here's our quick roadmap for today. We're going to cover the billion-dollar windfall myth, the real cost of hosting, stagnant growth and spiraling debt, the K-shaped consumer economy, a stock market bubble, and finally, counting fireworks or zeros. We'll methodically pivot from the microeconomics of hosting a soccer tournament into 4 major macroeconomic warning signs for the U.S., wrapping up with a historical look at why these spectacles happen when they do.
All right, let's hit Section 1, the billion-dollar windfall myth. This is where our source completely challenges those rosy economic headlines you've probably seen dominating the local news. To kind of humanize all the massive macroeconomic data we're about to explore, our source introduces us to 2 avatars, Tyler and Sophia. Now, they're the exact same age, they live in the same host city, and they both make about $60,000 a year. But Tyler, well, he's super optimistic. He absolutely believes the headlines about an incoming economic boom, so he throws a $1,200 ticket package and a brand new TV onto a credit card carrying a 21% interest rate. Sophia, on the other hand, is extremely cautious. She buys one cheap ticket in cash, watches the rest of the games on a friend's couch, and tucks her unspent money straight into a high-yield savings account. She basically starts asking some hard questions about the math that Tyler is completely taking for granted.
And those questions lead us to these numbers. City councils have been quoting FIFA's massive projection, a $17 billion windfall and 185,000 jobs for the U.S. alone. Sounds amazing, right? But Sophia looks past the excitement and finds independent data from the Boston Consulting Group. Their estimate? Just $5 billion and 40,000 jobs, and that is combined across all 3 host countries, the US, Canada, and Mexico. As the source points out, when the referee sells you on how fair the game is, you gotta remember that in this case, the referee is also the house. The actual windfall is a mere fraction of what's promised.
Moving right along to Section 2, the real cost of hosting. Let's take a look at who actually pays for the party when that promised tourist wave just fails to materialize. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're talking about. The historical ledger of past mega events paints a crystal clear picture. South Africa dropped $1 billion, and today, their beautiful Cape Town stadium loses up to $10 million a year just to keep the lights on. Then there's Brazil. They spent $4 billion, leaving a $300 million stadium in the Amazon mostly empty. Russia spent $11 billion. Basically, the public covers the security, the traffic, and the cleanup, while the organizer flies home with the lion's share of the profit. Now sure, the US is smartly avoiding construction debt by reusing existing stadiums, but as we'll see, the deeper behavioral trap, that is definitely still there.
In fact, we're already seeing the cracks form. The data shows that 80% of U.S. host city hotels are currently booking way below their forecasts. Why is that? Well, the source points to what they call the couch potato effect. Regular tourists actively avoid host cities because, frankly, they don't want to deal with crazy gridlock and tripled hotel rates. And locals? They stay home on their couches for the exact same reason. Now, for those pointing to the massive U.S. economic boom right after the 1994 World Cup, the source clarifies that the 90s boom was actually driven by the technological earthquake of the internet, not by a soccer tournament. The event was just the timing, not the cause.
Okay, let's shift to Section 3, stagnant growth, spiraling debt. We are moving our explainer from the stadium to the source's first 2 critical macroeconomic indicators. We literally have to start with this staggering reality. The U.S. national debt has crossed $39 trillion. Trillion with a T. To put the sheer speed of that into perspective, the source notes the U.S. is piling on a fresh $1 trillion of debt roughly every 5 months. Outside of a world war or a global financial crisis, the country has basically never borrowed money this fast in peacetime. It's wild.
Now, what's really interesting about these expenses is where that borrowed money is actually going. For the first time in history, the U.S. will spend over $1 trillion just on interest payments. That is more than the entire defense budget, and it's more than Medicare. The source neutrally highlights a historical rule from historian Niall Ferguson: any great power that ends up spending more on debt interest than on its own defense is on the way down. Why? Simply because the debt begins eating the future.
And while that debt spirals upward, economic growth is quietly doing the exact opposite. The source points to Goldman Sachs projecting growth somewhere between 1.25% and 1.75%. Economists call this stall speed. It's like an airplane moving so slowly that a minor shock, like, say, an unexpected spike in oil prices, can knock it right out of the sky. The polite term forecasters use is stagflation light. That's where economic growth slows down to a crawl, but the price of your groceries and gas just keeps climbing.
Which brings us right to Section 4, the K-shaped consumer economy. We're zooming in on the everyday consumer wallet, where our avatars Tyler and Sophia actually live and breathe.
To really understand the consumer right now, the source uses a concept called the K-shaped economy. Picture the letter K. One line goes up, and the other line goes down. This represents an economic environment where the wealthiest individuals are doing better than ever. That's the line pointing up, while the bottom half is quietly coming apart at the seams. The average between those two extremes looks completely healthy, which is exactly why headline numbers seem perfectly fine, even as everyday people feel like they're totally drowning.
If you want to see the upward arm of that K-shape in action, look no further than this number. $43,000. That was the shocking upper-end resale price for a single ticket to the World Cup final. Think about that for a second. There is an America that can casually drop the price of a decent used car on a single afternoon of soccer. No big deal.
But then there is the downward arm of the K-shape. American households are now carrying a record $18 trillion in total debt, and they're putting basic, everyday necessities on credit cards. The average interest rate on those cards? A whopping 21%. And you know, if you carry a balance at 21%, the real price of whatever you bought roughly doubles in about 4 years.
The data here is stark, and the trend is really accelerating. Everyday Americans aren't out there spending on jet skis. They're spending just to cover the gap between what they earn and the cost of living. The personal savings rate has completely collapsed to just 4%. Hidden tariff taxes are quietly costing households between $1,000 and $1,700 a year. Delinquency rates for young adults have doubled to 5%. It is honestly no wonder consumer sentiment has sank to recession-era levels. As the source puts it, people are treading water with heavy weights strapped to their ankles.
Now let's transition into Section 5, a stock market bubble. We'll take a hard look at the stock market, the very place where Tyler's optimistic investment portfolio lives.
By historical metrics, the stock market is flashing some major warning signs right now. Take the CAPE ratio, which measures how expensive stocks are compared to actual company earnings. This summer, it crossed 40. In 155 years of records, that dizzying height has been seen exactly one other time. 1999. Yep, right before the dot-com bubble burst. Add in a Buffett indicator pushing 220%, and you have a market that is priced for absolute perfection.
Now, to be fair, our source presents the steel man counter-argument here. Unlike 1999, today's market is driven by the Magnificent 7 tech stocks, which make up 37% of the entire index. And these companies aren't just a cool logo and a pipe dream. They are ferociously profitable, with absolute mountains of cash. But the source cautions that leaning an entire market on just 7 stocks creates 7 massive single points of failure. If they falter, the whole market feels the shockwave.
And this brings us to our final section, Section 6, counting fireworks or zeros. Let's bring our explainer to its climax by synthesizing these 4 macro numbers with the arrival of the global soccer spectacle.
So the crucial point is this historical analogy. The Romans famously called it bread and circuses. When an empire's foundation starts to rot and debts really stack up, the population naturally gets nervous. Rather than fix the hard, boring foundational issues, leaders throw spectacular games. It gives the people something magnificent to roar at, keeping their eyes up on the show instead of looking down at the ledger. The source argues it's absolutely no coincidence that the loudest spectacles often arrive right as a fading empire's math gets the absolute worst.
Let's fast forward a few years to resolve our tale of 2 citizens. Tyler's blind optimism left him totally exposed. His credit card debt compounded at that 21% rate, meaning the cost of his TV literally doubled. And when his work hours were cut during a stall speed slowdown, he had absolutely no cushion. Sophia, on the other hand, won simply by not losing. Her boring savings account gave her breathing room. She wasn't rich by any means, but she survived the slowdown because she budgeted for reality, while Tyler simply assumed it away.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought from the source. When the spectacular events roll into town, and the headlines are promising a golden era, you have to look at your own personal ledger. When the lights finally come up, the stands empty out, and the tourists fly home, are you counting the fireworks, or are you counting the zeros? Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I'll see you in the next explainer.